Welcome everybody to another great episode of the Beyond Normal podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Groom. We got a very special guest today who's offering some incredible legal services to businesses. But before we get into that, just want to shout out our partners over at Ascentum. They've been partnering with us strong this entire season. We're at the halfway mark now, so we're in the back half of the season. We got some incredible things in the work, but just want to quickly shout out Ascentum for all the things that they've done for us this season. Without further ado, I want to get into our guest for today, Abraham J. Williamson. He is the founder of GWC, Go With Canvas, which is offering legal service delivery for tech companies and investors. Reimagine, pivot on legal. We all know how important it is to have legal services in our personal lives, and so it makes perfect sense to have some cool partners working on legal services when it comes to running a business, being a founder. So without further ado, let's bring Abraham to the stage now. How's it going, Abraham?
Going great. Thank you for having me, Kenny. It's good to be on this side.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with Ascentum, which is an award-winning coaching practice that helps high-performing professionals advance and achieve the promotions and pay they deserve. Ascend to powerful heights with Ascentum.
Of the podcast world.
Yes, Abraham is a founder who's been in it for a while now. We're going to dive into that as well. We're going to start out with the company, though. Let folks know a little bit about what you had going on prior to you starting your own business, going out on your own. Tell us a little bit about you leading up to wearing that founder hat.
I appreciate that. So first, I'm not necessarily alone. I do have a team of great folks who work with us, and I've learned a lot from them on the legal tip and the business side, and it's good to have a team. But before all of this, even back in college, I was really on a path toward more policy and politics. I worked in DC City Council. I was a community support worker, which is basically like a social worker for people that have mental health illnesses, the precursor. Even worked on the Hill for a senator. And then I went to grad school overseas and started just seeing a lot of different things, and it sparked my curiosity. Then once I got to law school, I started asking myself, well, how does money work? I see politics, I see the litigation route, let me see what else is out there. And I ended up, wanting to pursue more like corporate and finance. But funnily enough, after I graduated from law school and before I started working at my first firm in New York, I actually worked in a photography gallery on Beale Street and learned there really how to sell and how to connect with customers, how to learn. I came in and I was teaching a sales training, and I had people who were like, you can't learn how to sell from YouTube, et cetera. And then once we hit the sales floor, we just made some small changes to how we were approaching customers, and it made a huge difference. It was the best month for prints ever, in the history of that museum. And I learned a lot from the people there. It was a team effort there too. So then once I got to the law firm, I started to see, okay, what does it look like to think about merging the sales and the business side with the actual skill set of being a lawyer?
I appreciate that. Appreciate that breakdown. You talked about wearing a lot of hats and you being drawn into that. That's pretty much the founder life in a nutshell, right? Wearing all those different hats, at least, figuring out what the different parts of the business are like. You mentioned finance. There's so many areas where a founder could spend their time. I want to dig into your profession, going in the legal space, right? Being an attorney. I'm curious, like, you going down that path, were there any early signs in your life, like think back to preteen years, leading up to your teenage years, were there some early signs where you knew this was the path that you were going to take with your life?
I think so. It's a profession that's around a lot of people. Most people, by the time they turn 8 years old, know what a lawyer is, maybe not exactly what you do day to day. So I was exposed to that. But different markers along the way kind of revealed that it might be something that I wanted to explore. A lot of people say they were good at arguing, and I don't know if that was true for me or not, but at the dinner table with my parents and family, we were constantly having conversations and discussions about a variety of things. And what I appreciate among many things about my parents is that, you know, we were having creative discussions with each other. Sometimes it would be my dad thought this, I had a different view. My mom thought this, I had a different view. And we talked about it. It wasn't like, know your place, don't say anything. It was bring your best arguments to the table. And we really kind of worked that out. And I changed my mind a lot after those conversations as well. And also began to refine and develop and learn how to talk to people. And I took that into debate when I was in high school. But when I was in college, as I mentioned, I was a community support worker. And I remember a situation where I was counseling somebody who was unhoused. They had, some drug addiction that they had beaten or were basically beaten. And I had to go to court one day. And that was my first time ever walking into, the DC, district court. And when I walked in there, my client was sort of last on the docket, and I just saw 4 hours of people going down for, different drug crimes, just all types of stuff. And it really kind of was making me sick to my stomach to just see in less than 10 minutes, people's lives to be changed. I mean, different view about what happened leading up to that point, but just seeing the vulnerability there was eye-opening for me. So then when my client got up there, that was actually the first trial that had a witness. And so I listened to the witness for one of my clients, and I just kind of heard their testimony and saw how the counsel for my client was operating. The judge was attempting to say, hey, I don't think you can use that argument. That's not what the law says. Do something else. And, he got sentenced to, like 4 months probation. So he didn't get jail time. Anyway, after it was over, the public defender was like, I'm busy, which is true. Go register him for probation. So I walked across the street with him and was filling out the paperwork, and my client couldn't even fill out his address, couldn't even spell where he lived. And then when we went behind, the desk in front of the computer, you saw his rap sheet was just like super long. So that began to draw the links for me with education and how the law really does impact people's lives. And I realized that day that I didn't want to be a spectator, having my, getting sick to my stomach watching it. I actually wanted to participate in some way.
And that's a dope story, man. I think, we all have, people in our life that we can relate to with that, where, stuff happens, that and it gets worse when you don't have somebody sitting there going through what your representation should be like. Here's what these documents mean. Here's what these options actually mean. And then it just sends you down this path. And, that's not necessarily setting you up for success. I can think of people in my life where they had something early on in their life happen and they didn't necessarily have those people in their corner from a legal standpoint. And from that very first time where something happened, right? And then it doesn't set their life up for success. That translates well, I think, into the business world, right? Where founders got a lot, they probably have spent the time, figuring out, the pain point that they're trying to solve with their product. But then there's all these other parts to the business, the legal piece, making sure your business is registered the right way, safe notes, all these different terms that can get thrown at you. And so you can kind of get lost in the sauce in a lot of ways from the business world. So I appreciate you laying out that story now, that background that's got you to this point. Tell us a little bit about GWC and what were you seeing that founders didn't necessarily have, where you feel like you could fill that niche, fill that void?
Yeah. So first off, founders, in my experience, are, pretty sharp in terms of what they explore on the internet, and they're gaining as much knowledge as they can across the board in their business. What we often saw, though, was folks who were still figuring out and learning what specifically building a venture capital business looks like. Many folks in our community, we like entrepreneurship, we like businesses, everybody at some point has probably thought about or has an LLC, but venture is different. There's a particular type of company that venture investors, angel investors want to put their money into, and also a particular way they're expecting it to look. How many, shares you have, how you have issued the stock, just various different things that, founders, when we see them, oftentimes there may be some things, but not all things there. And then when it comes to protecting their IP and making sure that the IP is in the business, that they have not, hired people to do work for them that they don't actually own. These are the types of things that we help people with along the way. And then, like you said, safe notes have become more popular recently. You can have a lot of people handing them out like a Pez dispenser in some cases, and then you look at your cap table and you're like, what happened, or what was the actual implication of this? How much of the business did I actually give up? So, like I said, many founders are knowledgeable, but we do find that there are sometimes opportunities for us to go in and just shore up their foundation.
And that makes perfect sense. It's crazy. It's like, the legal space for people that look like me and you, a lot of times that initial feeling is like, well, I hope I never have to have an attorney, right? But then I can think of the instances where I have had an attorney help me look at something, in the room with me. Obviously there's a cost, right? I think that's the initial piece, but just having that person in my corner, they were able to, whether it's a speeding ticket, whether it's something for a job, an employer, they're able to take stuff off of my plate, right? Where I can actually focus on what I wanted to be doing, right? And so I think that's the piece where there's like that initial like bad taste because you're spending money, but you got to spend some money in order to make money. And when you get past that, in my experience, the limited amount of times that I have had to have legal representation, the money was like always well spent, man. Down to the speeding tickets. I'll be honest, I have gotten speeding tickets, folks. No surprise. But I do not want to be going into the courtroom explaining myself in Kenny language while I was speeding. I'd rather have an attorney sitting there walking me through the process and allowing me to focus on the parts that I need to focus on.
That's huge. And that's another value add, is learning how to speak the language, what to say, how to say things, the phraseology about it. And then, we also see a lot of different companies. And so another benefit with having a lawyer of any type is they're going to be able to give you a sense of what other people are doing, broadly speaking. So you can see if your approach is off base, it can innovate, but like, what are the parameters around that? And by the way, having been in the car with you, I do think you're a safe driver most of the time.
Thank you so much. All right, so you touched on this a little bit earlier. Like, you have a team. There's an incredible team behind GWC. Like, what led you to go down the path where you're joining forces with other attorneys? You guys are creating this A team. Like, talk a little bit about like what went into that thought process for you all to get together versus, some people want to go the solo route, be a solopreneur, do things on their own. What did you see where it made sense to have this team, this powerful team put together?
That's a good question. I will break this up into two parts. First, like how we even got to know each other at all. During the pandemic, I knew that I wanted to pivot, my life. I wasn't necessarily expected to move to Nashville, Tennessee when I moved to New York, but I liked the opportunity to come back to the South, but I also wanted to pivot my practice from, private equity to venture capital, which is what I did. But I had a few options of firms that I was choosing between. And I actually chose the one that offered me the least amount of money, but in my opinion, it gave me the most opportunity for growth. One, it allowed me to meet my current business partners and really learn under them, which was huge. But secondly, they really encouraged me to develop a book of business on my own and put the systems in place to allow me to do that. And that was something that I was interested in, because to go out on your own, you're going to have to learn how the top line can grow. And the only way to do that is new customers. And I learned that at that firm. But when we were knocking on a year, there were circumstances that were pushing us to potentially go outside of the current firm where we were. And, I had the idea, I'm like, why don't we just start, our own? Like, we have the tools and the pieces together. None of us had ever done it before, but we thought, hey, why not? We can give it a shot. And those were the circumstances that brought us together. And there are a lot of decisions that you have to make in not just a law firm, but any business, the choices that you're going to make about how you set it up, the systems, the processes, the values, and the mission. And we were learning that in real time.
Yeah, that's dope, man. Taking that gamble on yourselves, that's huge. Is there a certain type of company that you all are looking for at this time to represent, or is there a wider net being cast across the team?
I think there is a specific profile that we often find from contact to becoming a client. They tend to move through the process more quickly or more fully. And, the profile could be someone who, they're at a university right now and they're in a business class and they have an idea and they're going to pitch competitions and they want to turn their idea into an actual business. Where do they start? That's a really good candidate for us. Or an entrepreneur who's been going along for a few years, but now they're like, okay, I actually want to level up. A lot of folks who come into contact with us are also looking to go into accelerators like, Techstars, YC, Generator, and some of the other great accelerators around the country. So I think it's folks who know that their business idea is more than a lifestyle business. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a $1 billion company, but people who are like, look, I have a good business, and in order to grow, I need outside capital. Those are really good candidates for us because those people are motivated to do what they need to do to move forward. And then from a financial standpoint, I had to learn this lesson as well. Like you said, lawyers do cost money. And so I had to think about what is my retainer going to be? And early on, it was lower, which actually was counterintuitive. It made it harder, and the clients didn't necessarily have the same skin in the game as we did because we perform our work and then we get paid. So I upped my retainer to $2,000, which I think is a good amount for people who know that they have a lawyer and that they need legal services. And you're not probably going to spend all that in 1 month. In the first month, it's going to be spread out. But I would say those are the type of candidates. That being said, it's not just people college age. We also have clients who are more experienced in their career. Maybe they're leaving their employer and they have this idea. They've been working at a place for 10 years or so, and they want to go out and start a company. We help those folks too.
Got it. So it really is it is a wide net, but like you said, you're meeting people, where they are in their entrepreneur journey, which I think is, that's really what people need now more than ever. Like you said, you could be at the idea phase, or you could be a entrepreneur who's had some traction. You got to get to that next level, and VC may be the way. So you gotta have people in your corner when you go that route. VC is a bloodbath at times. So the more reinforcements you have going into it, I think it allows the founder to be level-headed as much as they possibly can going through that insane process. How do you prepare founders? You and the team prepare founders for, like, we know the odds of a founder that looks like me and you going through and getting some VC capital is like really small. Like, how do you prepare founders that want to go that route for the reality that they may not get it? Does that make sense?
It does. And that's a really good question. I think being upfront about the odds, I mean, most people, like I said, they're smart. They know that, the chances are slim. I think going into it, it's that, upfront, accepting it's going to be tough or it's going to take longer than you might think. And then there's also, Kenny, the aftermath where, you've been at it for a few months and you thought you were going to raise, $500,000 or $1 million in 2 months and go back to work. And sometimes it takes 2, 3, 4 times as much as that. And you may not see an end path. So part of our role as well is encouraging them along the way, hopefully making introductions where it makes sense and just telling them to keep at it. That being said, the practical advice that we often give is, 2 things is one, to take away the chances for people to say no from your house, being in order. And then secondly, for me, I often do talk about, your customers. You got like, that is your strength. Like if you have customers who really like what you're doing, they're willing to pay for it, they're committed to you. That is some of your best armor when you go out to raise capital, because people are looking for that. Sometimes people can get away with the ideas, but oftentimes people want to know that you have traction, which is either users, revenue, or technology.
I love that. I love that. So wow, you're allowing me to. You're giving me so many segues, Abraham. So I guess next up, I wanna change things up a little bit in terms of um, what have you, wearing your founder hat, what's an area where you've had to spend a little bit more time? You touched on this a little bit earlier where your peers want you to go out and have your own book of business. Like what's a part of the business where you've had to spend a little bit more time because you didn't have that experience? You feel like you needed to strengthen your skill set in that area of the business, wearing that hat for the business. Like what's the area you spent some time in that's not your normal wheelhouse?
Yeah, I mean, I think a bunch. I mean, even just the subject matter alone, things are changing all the time. The way that venture looked when, I first started pivoting into this practice area, 18 months ago has changed drastically since then. Just further along, I work with a lot of pre-seed companies. So learning what it looks like further down the field is another area that I'm exploring and growing in, especially as they get more employees and managing what that looks like, bigger contracts, et cetera. But then from an internal standpoint, I think it's, systems, because it's not a matter of if you're going to make a mistake. It's, how are you going to like learn from them and fortify yourself from them and really build systems in place that can catch them before they happen. So that's what I've been looking at more so this year is, building systems. What is, more automation, more workflows look like, because there are only so many hours in a day. And if you're doing every single thing, you're going to tap yourself out. I know in the conversations that we've had, Kenny, you've talked about your journey with the podcast. At first is you doing everything. And then as you grow and you add people, it allows you to do more. And that's leveraging people. Like technology. We were talking about AI before this and how that grows. So I think oftentimes as lawyers, we're like, this is the way we've always done it. Why would we change? But I think now more than ever, we're really being pushed to have to become more efficient in different ways because clients have more options. People can go to various different software online. And as much as we can beat them up and say, hey, they're not as good as we are, that's still a choice that clients are using, and they'd rather come to us later than at the beginning. So how do we nurture the relationship early on and provide a lot of value? The only way to do that without taking away from too much billable time is to have systems in place that allow us to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. And so they can maximize the retainer, like you said, like get the most out of it. That makes perfect sense. So, now that folks have, when they come in to the GWC ecosystem, they have the full kind of they have the full team. They have they have all the resources that GWC has at its disposal. What's that one thing where what's that one area, that one thing, that one check the box that founders don't come to you with already done that you wish that they would have come already?
Yeah, oftentimes it's formation. People start with an MVP of sorts for their like entity formation. Oftentimes people, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but it's more common than not in a lot of ways for people to, have an LLC or to issue just a handful of stock compared to what we would do, or they haven't, issued stock to themselves. They haven't signed over the IP to themselves. They've made a lot of promises, but the documentation doesn't match. And I'm not saying this to beat up on founders, because I didn't know any of this when I started either, and I'm still learning along the way. And I think that helps to be able to, one, give people confidence, hey, we know what we're doing and we can help. And also, I've been there. I remember what it was like really learning the space. So that's probably the thing that I hope that more people will come is early on to say, look, I'm taking this seriously. I'm going to go ahead and invest it at the front end because there are mistakes you can make early on that will be more costly to remedy later on. And if you're going to pay that anyway, you might as well put the retainer down, get your house in order early. And you're also going to get somebody who's in the ecosystem who can really help you and advise you and just become a part of your team.
Mm-hmm. That's dope, man. Everything you're saying right there, I completely agree with. Like you mentioned, company structure. I feel like even me myself, I just went down there and was like, let me check the box on a couple things and hope that Uncle Sam doesn't come after me. I'll be honest, Abraham, and I know just from our conversations, just the little bit of game I've been able to soak up from you, that helps so much. Like just having conversations with folks like you who are knowledgeable on it versus kind of going it alone is huge for founders. I want to pivot to the podcast because you are a fellow podcaster as well. Tell folks a little bit, the name of the podcast, where you're streaming it, the platforms and things like that, and what's the focus of it in terms of who you like to have on as guests.
Yeah, so the podcast is a part of Diverse Tech Founders Media. Shout out to you for helping me with that pivot to go from podcast to media more broadly. But we're on all platforms, Apple and Spotify. Both of those do really well. Most people do listen on Apple, but Spotify is doing well. Also, I think last year we were like in the top, 15 most shared globally, which was a surprise for me, but it just goes to show you that people are finding value in the stories. I mean, we've had you on as well, Kenny. So the people that we're interested in bringing on are founders and investors or folks within the community, ecosystem builders of sort, who have a company and their mission is aligned with ours, which is to leverage the one thing that's older than capital, which is social capital. It's no surprise that in a lot of ways, folks in our community see the numbers and that there is a little investment in particular founder demographics. I am a Black person. Many of the folks who come on the podcast are Black, and my mission and goal is to highlight those stories because in many cases, sometimes it's the first time that they have been interviewed for a podcast, and I want them to get more reps in that way. But the biggest thing for me is connecting people with each other. That's really how I started. I didn't know anything or anybody in venture whatsoever. I wasn't even practicing in the space, but I started hosting events in New York in our apartment. And at the time, my roommate was the Wall Street artist. So our living room doubled as his studio. So it was a nice aesthetic. People would come and we would have really good conversations where it wasn't a pitch competition. People were just vibing on, here is a safe space for people to come and talk about venture, not business, not work, but to vibe with people and then take that conversation offline. So when the pandemic hit, I had a choice to make. Are we going to stop and wait for this to end before we convene again and pick this back up again and try to pretend like 2 or 3 years we can just pause it? Or are we going to keep these conversations going? And so we moved it online, first over Zoom, season 1, season 2, actually got on the plane and in my car and met people. We got a chance to have an in-person conversation in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been to, Miami and Houston and San Francisco, even Detroit and New York and Kansas City. And I've learned a lot about the local ecosystems in those various different cities, as you have as well. And I think you see and share in our mission, which is what does it look like to connect those ecosystems with each other? In fact, one of the guests on the podcast in an offline conversation was talking about how there's a lot of talent on the coast in the big tech companies. What does it look like to have people who work at those companies in business development, in tech, in customer success, those accountants, those lawyers, those operators, to come down to the South and link up with some of the startups down here and really build up their education level also. So part of my mission is to merge that. And we have folks as well overseas in the UK. We're expanding as much as we can into other countries to interview people to come on the podcast and share their story, and also to give people practical advice so that if I'm listening to it and I don't know anything about venture, I learn. And if I'm deep in this space, I'm glad I found it, because I'm not going to find these conversations anywhere else except for with Beyond Normal.
I love that, man. I love that. And just like you touching on it during the pandemic, starting out using your living room, having these amazing conversations and figuring out how you can, turn it into a resource online for folks. I mean, that's powerful. That sounded like a movie as you were playing it out. I'm all about, our stories becoming, the big screen. And I enjoy the podcast. I'm deep into it. Folks definitely need to check it out. We've got I think there's a couple of founders that have been on both platforms, like maybe 2 or 3. So it's always cool to see folks really leveraging the podcast medium, leveraging folks like myself and you, Abraham. We have different backgrounds, but there's value to add across the board for everybody. So appreciate you plugging the podcast there. We'll make sure we send up a couple follow-up links. And I enjoyed being on your podcast and seeing your process, and we're learning from each other. Like, there's plenty of knowledge to go around, and so why not share it? Definitely appreciate you extending that olive branch and letting me hop on, because I had a blast with the questions you asked me. And like you touched on it at the beginning of this episode, it's always different being on the other side, right? Us as podcasters, we're always asking people questions, but then like it's cool for folks to ask you about your story, how you're building your media company alongside GWC. So appreciate you elaborating on it. And telling folks how to connect with it. My last question, is kind of a twofer, but essentially, how can folks connect with the brand, keep up to date? The site looks amazing for those listening in and checking it out. So I'm always going on the site, finding new things, but how can folks connect with the brand? And then 2, and in closing, what do you want folks to take away from this conversation? What's that lasting thing that you want them to keep in the back of their mind as they're thinking about starting their business, they're building out their team, they're chasing that venture capital money? Like, what do you want folks to take away?
Sure. So in terms of connecting with the brand, you can really reach out to me on LinkedIn. I do check it probably every day. And if not every day, every, 36, 48 hours or so. Just give me a little bit of blurb. Sometimes the emails I don't get back to, but for the most part, when people reach out, I often do, take calls with people, especially if there's alignment. So just feel free to reach out to me. I will get back with you and respond. And then in terms of the takeaway or what people to really kind of, keep noodling on after this interview or after this recording is the power of relationships. When I was just getting started and when others are just getting started, you may not know everybody who's going to be there when it's time for you to win. And so just take those early relationships, people who are there and showing up, take those seriously. I remember hearing a quotation from somebody who was like, 1/3 of the people are going to like you, maybe love you, but let's say 1/3 of the people are going to like you. 1/3 of the people are going to not like you no matter what you do. And 1/3 of the people in the middle may not really care either way. So satisfying the 1/3 who really does like you and is there for you, usually the 1/3 who's in the middle, they'll respect that. And that's how you grow. There was an episode on social capital that kind of digs in a little bit more about what it looks like to grow and build relationships. So that's what I would leave people with.
You dropping bars at the end. I appreciate that, Abraham. Just like you said, find your tribe, focus on those who are really there to support you. That's always big. It's okay to have people who aren't necessarily for you. Some people just, call that an opportunity. Some people call them haters. It's good to have haters, guys. It is a good thing, believe it or not. I know it sounds crazy, but it's good to have folks to sit there that, you can push forward through things and really prove them wrong. And so I appreciate you dropping that last bar, that nugget. Abraham, it's been a blast. Like you said, we have plenty of conversations offline. And so this is like the 3rd or 4th conversation of many to come. Abraham is always traveling, so we're definitely going to try to figure out how we get an in-person interview sooner rather than later. But appreciate you for coming on the platform, sharing your story. And for those listening in, thanks again for tuning in to another great episode of the Beyond Normal podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Kenny. And your episode sticks with me to this day in really laying out how people can benefit from this medium, because when people come on, it's a win. And it's a win because they get a chance to practice telling their story more. And when they move forward, they'll remember when they sat down with Kenny on the Beyond Normal Media.
Appreciate that. Thanks, folks.